The greatest command. We should not be surprised if the Lord at times tests the extent of our love for Him. Here's Gene.
It's interesting that as John concluded his gospel, he illustrates this principle in the life of the Apostle Peter. And it's fascinating. It's a fascinating story. And so I want to take you right to the event, because that's what John does. And we find it in John chapter 21, the last chapter, and I call this fishing in Galilee. Now, before I read this, let me simply say that at some point in time, after Jesus appeared to the men, the apostles there, and to Thomas in that upper room where the doors were locked and they were very fearful, even in spite of the fact that Jesus had appeared to them, had reassured them, that didn't do away with their fear. And that certainly didn't do away with the hostility that existed in Jerusalem, because the Romans as well as the Jewish leaders were trying to prove that someone came and stole Jesus' body. And that's why the tomb was empty. But they've never, ever proved that someone stole that body. They have never found that body, and there's a reason. Jesus came forth from that tomb. He was resurrected and eventually ascended back to heaven. But in the meantime, these men, and there are 7 of them that are mentioned here, in their fear, left Jerusalem and went back to their home base in Galilee. Now it's about 100 miles. And so they go back to doing what they knew to do best, perhaps to just try to get away from the anxiety and the fear that they were feeling. And that was to go fishing. And notice what we read. Simon Peter, Thomas, called twin, Nathanael from Cana of Galilee. You see, all of these men were from Galilee. And then Zebedee's sons, we know who that was, right? James and John, and 2 others. And there, I think, probably that refers to Philip and Andrew, because we see them mentioned throughout the Gospel of John in a unique relationship. Can't prove that, but we know there were 7. And 2 other of his disciples were together. I'm going fishing, Simon Peter said to them. We're coming with you, they told him. Now, to me, that's interesting. 3.5 years ago, approximately, Jesus invited Peter and Andrew and James and John and some of these other men to follow him and to become fishers of men. And they joined him because they probably thought that they were going to be very powerful men when Jesus Christ sat on the throne of David and took over Judea and took it away from the power of Rome. And they were disappointed because that didn't happen. And they're still disillusioned trying to figure this out. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Now, here's the interesting thing. Remember now, this is 100 miles from Jerusalem. As the sun was coming up, and they didn't recognize him, but Jesus was standing on the shore. And he called out to them, and he said, have you caught anything? And they said, no, we fished all night, we haven't caught a thing. And so Jesus simply said, throw the net on the other side of your boat. And they did, and you know what happened. This incredible net of fish, filling the nets as if they were going to break. And then suddenly John, who was there, John the Apostle who wrote this, recorded this, he said, it's the Lord. They recognized Jesus. Nobody could do that except Jesus. In fact, he had done this before. And for Peter, this was deja vu, because it had happened before, even before Jesus had called him to be a fisher of men. And basically what happened is that when Jesus was in Galilee, when he first went to Galilee and started teaching around the Sea of Galilee, Jesus came along, there were great multitudes, and he had met Peter and John. Obviously, he had met them earlier, about 6 months earlier, up in the Jerusalem area. But he had come and he had been teaching, and so they knew what he was teaching, and Jesus came and the crowds were pressing in on him, and so he stepped into Peter's boat and he said, "Hey, Peter, just push out a little bit." And Peter was kind of upset because they had been fishing all night and hadn't caught anything. It's probably early morning. They were tired. And but reluctantly, Peter let him in the boat, pushed out. And after Jesus had spoken to the crowds for a while, he said, "Hey guys, let's go out in the deep." And Peter really got reluctant. And he said, "Look, we fished all night, we haven't caught anything." And Jesus said, "Push out." Well, you know the story. They pushed out, and he said, "Throw your net on the other side," and they caught this incredible net of fish. That was about 3.5 years before this final event there in the Gospel of John. Can you imagine what Peter was thinking at that moment? This was indeed deja vu. But God is teaching him something, because way back then, 3.5 years before, after this happened, he fell before the Lord and he said, "Lord, forgive me, I'm a sinful man." He recognized in himself his sin. But here he is now, still the leader of these other men, because he was probably the leader there of the fishing business, Zebedee's fishing business. And God chose them out of that fishing business. But here they are. And so Peter, wanting to prove his love, goes overboard, runs to the shore. Jesus has already prepared fish on the coals, and they ate. But after they had breakfast, Jesus tested Peter. It's amazing. Here's his first test. Chapter 21, verse 15. When they had eaten breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Now, a couple things. Number one is, any time that Jesus wanted to really teach Peter a lesson, he would use his name before he changed his name to Peter. He reverts back to his original name, Simon. And so he says, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And the "these," I think, refers to these other men, these other guys that are right there with him. Now, some believe he was referring to the boats and the nets and so forth, and that's a possibility. But if you look at the whole context, I think he's referring to these men. "Do you love me more than these?" Peter responded, "Yes, Lord," he said to him. "You know that I love you." But it's interesting, he didn't say, "You know I love you more than these," because that was an embarrassing question. You see, earlier he had said to Jesus, "If all of these men forsake you, I never will." "Peter, do you love me more than these?" And so, somewhat evasively, he says, "Lord, you know I love you." And then Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Who are the lambs? These other guys. They're still lambs. But then Jesus tested him a second time. A second time he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you," and I think you'd say, "Do you really love me?" I think you can imply that. Do you really love me? Now, he didn't say more than these, but he said, "Do you really love me? Let me check your heart." Peter says, "Yes, Lord." He said to him, "You know that I love you. You know that." And then Jesus said, "Well, shepherd my sheep," he told him. In other words, these men that are sitting there are going to become sheep. They're going to grow and mature from lambs to sheep, and they're going to need a leader. And thus far, Peter, you haven't done too well. I've been preparing you for 3.5 years. And then we have the third test. He asked him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And notice, Peter was grieved that he asked him the third time, do you love me? And I think at this particular point, he hung his head and he said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And then Jesus said, feed my sheep. Now, what's going on in Peter's mind? The third time, the third question, do you love me? You see, Jesus is taking him back to what happened in the upper room when there was a squabble and Peter may have been trying to bring peace among the apostles, arguing about who was going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Here's what we have recorded in Luke. I call this a convicting memory of Peter. When he heard Jesus ask him the third time, do you love me? Simon, Simon, look out. Now this is in the upper room. This is before the crucifixion. Satan is asked to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And you, when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. Whoa, there on that shore, this is his moment to turn back, to get back on the right path, and to strengthen your brothers. Who are the brothers? The other men, the other apostles. Peter, I've chosen you to be their leader. And they need you, but they need you as a mature leader. But notice what he said back in the upper room. Lord, he told him, I'm ready to go with you both to prison and to death. And Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, he said, the rooster will not crow today until you deny 3 times that you know me. With that third question there in the test, he knew exactly what Jesus was talking about. Do you love me more than these? You said you did. But there actually came a time when you denied 3 times that you, get this, know me. You denied, Peter, that you knew me. And I'm asking you, do you love me? There's a big difference between lying that you know somebody and saying that you love them because they're a reality. And Peter got that message. God was testing him. And it's a powerful story of the fact that in this principle that we have here, this last principle, that we should not be surprised if the Lord at times tests the extent of our love for him. And so I leave you with this question. In what ways has Jesus tested your motives regarding your relationship with him? Well, if we open it up for discussion, we could share a great deal about the tests that God has allowed to come into our lives to demonstrate our love and our faith. I know that's happened in my own life, particularly as a spiritual leader, as a father, husband, but especially in church planting. And, you know, the amazing tests that came in church planting often was God didn't let me know what was going to happen the next day. And I had to take steps of faith with my leaders, and I had to lead the leaders by faith. And sometimes when I took that step, I doubted whether I'd even said that I had said the right thing. In other words, I said I would trust him and God is going to take care of us. What if he doesn't take care of us? And I had to trust him, go to my knees. And you see, that's the way God tests us frequently. He doesn't simply tell us what he's going to do in the future, but he tests us to see whether or not we really love him, whether we really believe in him, and whether we're really willing to follow him. And that really is what John wants us to think about as we close the page on the last chapter of the Gospel of John.